Okay, so here we have the wooden box that we made to do the vacuum forming. We used 1/4-inch plywood, and then in the corners we used pieces of wood that we had left around. I was originally going to use the wood that we had left around, and I believe it's 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch or 5/8, somewhere around in there. But regardless, this is only 1/4 inch. And what I ran into, the reason why I ended up going with this material was, as you can see, I don't have a lot of room. And that's what I was referring to in the beginning of the video when I said, don't do what I did. So if you've got one of these this size, I would recommend making it at least 1 to 2 inches bigger on the top and bottom. That way you've got more suction coming all the way around and you're going to get a better mold. Ours ended up fine, there's no issues in the molds, but that's what my recommendation would be. So having said that, I couldn't use any thicker wood because I would block off all these holes along the top and bottom. So what we did was, you'll see in the moment in the video, we just used a 1/4 inch plywood, and then we reinforced the corners, as you can see our nails, with 3/4 by 3/4 inch wood. And we just cut those pieces down and reinforced the corners along with putting some glue in there. You'll also notice we've got a hole here. This hole is for the vacuum to hook up. Now the ideal of that, you see here, this is what we use. Now we have a shop vac that we used, and the shop vac goes into one side, and then this is just an adapter, and it goes into here. You could use a vacuum cleaner if you don't have a shop vac. You could possibly even rent one from Home Depot. I think they rent pretty much any kind of tool you can need, so you could probably rent one from there as well if you don't want to buy one. But shop vacs aren't a lot of money. I'm not going to talk about the prices in the video because more than likely you've got a vacuum in your house you could use to do this if you don't have a shop vac. But one thing to take note of is the reason why we've got this hole here at this size. We did this box at 4 inches tall, and I did that specific measurement because I knew how big this was, and I wanted to have enough meat on the top and bottom of this hole so that not only when we cut the hole, but when we're putting this thing in and out, it doesn't break the wood. This is only 1/4 inch plywood, and if I would have went with a smaller size, more than likely we would have damaged the wood or cracked it or broke it, and I didn't want to deal with that. So I ended up giving myself about 1.5 inches on both sides of the hole just to make sure that I wouldn't run into any problems. There's no real science behind the dimension that I used here. All I recommend doing it for you to do is see how large the hoses that you're going to use or the adapter for your vacuum, and then give yourself, center it inside the box. I would go center left to right and center up and down, and then give yourself about 1.5 to 2 inches on both sides of the outside of that circle. Not the center, but the outside of the circle, just to make sure it's strong enough to support it. Another part we did for this, that you'll see, is the mold itself. So this is pegboard that we used. We purchased a sheet of this, a 2x4 sheet, which is more than enough for what we needed. And I got an idea of this from another YouTuber, and I thought it was great because originally I was just going to get a piece of plywood and drill a bunch of holes in it. But after seeing his video, it just made so much more sense to buy one of these, cut it to the size, and this has got a nice smooth finish on it. It's easy to work with, easy to cut, and it's already got all the holes. So you don't really have to do much other than just cut it and screw it in. But I made one of these for each one of our eyes. We've got 2 different sizes of masks, and the masks have obviously 2 eyes. So we've got 4 different molds. For each mold, I just screwed them into the bottom of, I screwed through the bottom of the pegboard into the bottom of the mold. And then whenever we need to switch it out, we just take the screws out and then screw the other one on. Only takes a couple seconds. It's very easy to work with. For the pegboard, for a 2x4 sheet, we paid $6.39. And then I already had the plywood laying around, but you can purchase a 1/4 inch piece of plywood that's 2x4 feet for around $17. So I found a link on Menards. It was $16.99, and I'll put that link there so you can see it as well for the pegboard. But 2x4 is more than what's necessary for this. We just had some extra pieces laying around, but it's not going to cost you that much. So you've got the plywood here. If you don't have some extra wood to put on the inside corners, you could purchase a small piece of trim to reinforce the corners, or you can make the box however you want. Doesn't matter. But you can see I've got how I made this. I made the box the same size to fit the pegboard sheets that we used on the bottom. Another thing that I want to show you guys too to take consideration of, I showed you the frames a moment ago that we did. Now, it's very important that, we talked about you need to size your toaster oven according to the size of your mold. Well, something else to consider is this frame needs to be larger than this, because what you're going to do is whenever you're over top of it, and you'll see it in the video, we're going to come down over top and then we're going to pull it down and then turn the vacuum on. You want this to go down over top. If it doesn't fit on there and you just come down to here somewhere, you're not going to get as tight of a seal and it's not going to work as well. So I made this just bigger than the box itself. I've got around 1/8 of an inch gap all the way around it to fit on here. I don't even know if it's a full 1/8 of an inch all the way around. It may just be 1/8 of an inch overall bigger, but I just made it big enough to where I could, when I'm looking down on top of it, I can center it, pull it down, and then we turn the vacuum on to get it done. So just size everything correctly and you'll be okay. But first, figure out how big your mold is, figure out how big your plate's going to be. Then you're going to have to make the inside of this a little bit bigger. This is a 1/2 inch that I used here, so you've got that 1/2 inch extra. And then get that dimension. Figure out how big your outside edges are and see if that's going to fit into whatever toaster oven you're looking at buying. If it's not, then you're going to have to get a different one. Okay, now we'll get into the making of both of these parts. All right, so update. We cut the leftover wood that we had sitting around, and the problem is, you can see how thick it is. I think this is 5/8, 11/16, something like that. Well, the problem is this needs to be a little bit smaller than the frame, and it's going to take up so much room that unfortunately we're not going to have enough room left. So we'll try to do something a little different. We are going to try to make the box of this panel board. And what we're going to do is we'll cut the sides and then we'll cut a strip of this, just a square, and glue and nail this into the corners for support. I think this will be sufficient enough to hold everything together, and where this isn't very thick, it'll give us more room that we can work from. So that's the plan. Will it work? Who knows? We'll see what happens. To start, I cut all 5 sides for the box out of 1/4 inch plywood on my table saw. After cutting the plywood, I cut 11/16 wood supports to use in the corners of the box. These were used to provide more material for the glue to adhere to. I used Type Bond 3 Ultimate Wood Glue to adhere the sides together. To attach the sides to the supports, I used 3/4 inch nails. The nails hold everything together until the glue dries. I applied glue between the side and the supports first, and then I went around all the corners with glue to strengthen the box as much as possible. Once everything was glued, I let it set overnight before doing any more work on it. Alright guys, so we got our box made. As you can see, we loaded the inside with glue. I want to make sure that this is as solid as it can be whenever we get that vacuum hooked up to this thing. It fits just as it should right inside of our frame, so that's all good. The next step we're going to do is, I've got the top pretty well leveled out, but we're going to level the bottom out just to try to keep this thing sitting as flat as it can on the tabletop, and go through and do the top as well just to make sure it gets as smooth as possibly can be. To do that, we're going to use our sander. I'm using some 80 grit sandpaper, and that's because it's rough and I want to remove as much material as I can quickly as possible, so I'm not sanding on this all day. So we'll do this, and then afterwards we're going to cut some pegboard, 2 pieces that'll screw into the top, and then we're going to screw through the bottom of the pegboard into the bottom of our eye molds right here. I want to do that just to try to make sure this holds as still as it can whenever we go to try to vacuum form this thing and see what we get. I still don't know what to expect. This could be a disaster, who knows. But anyways, we're going to find out together, and we'll start sanding. Okay, so we've got it all pretty good shape. Got everything sanded down. Now we are going to work on sanding down the eyes. Now if you can see that the way this is made, and this is just because I use Tinkercad, and unfortunately I can't go to a higher resolution than this with the models that they provide on Tinkercad. So we've got this almost like a strobe light look to this because of the resolution can't get up any higher. And this part over here I don't care, because this is just going to be excess that we can cut off from the lens whenever we mold it. But here, if we try to look through it, even though it's clear with all these, everything is going to look off, kind of like looking in one of those kaleidoscopes. So I'm going to try to sand as much of this down as I can to get it as smooth as possible in the eye area. And I'm going to try to do this as much as I can with our sander. And then once I get it decent, I'll go back by hand and get it the rest of the way. But we're going to try to get this as smooth as we can, and then we'll move on to the next step. So the 80 grit sandpaper made pretty short work of this, which is what I was hoping for. We're going to do the other eye, and then we'll gradually go down. I don't know, we'll probably do 80, maybe up to 220, and then finish it with a 400 grit or whatever we've got laying around here that's somewhat close to that. I'm not going for it to be perfect. We just want to get a lot of these ridges and things out of here, so whenever we go to make our lens, it'll be as clear as possible. So now we need to drill a hole in the box so that we can input our vacuum into the side of it. What we've decided to use is our 1.5" hole saw bit, which matches up to the end here. And I'm just going to drill this centered into the side. I figure that way it'll try to be as even as possible as far as the suction goes from the top. If we put it on one side or the other, I don't know if that's going to have any type of mixed results, because it may be more powerful on that side. So we're just going to put it right in the middle and go from there. So there we have it. Nice tight fit. It's not going anywhere. It should be perfect for what we're trying to do. All right, you guys, so now we're going to try to make the top pieces. The idea is going to be that we're going to use this pegboard, and we are going to, after we cut, we're going to cut 2 of these. So we've got 1 piece for each one of these. You notice there's a flat spot on the bottom here. So what we want to do, I want to cut this, and I want to have a couple holes in the end to screw to here. And then we're going to screw from the bottom up into the bottom of these 2 screws. That way it will hold it in the correct position that it needs to be in whenever we go to put the actual sheet of plastic over top of it to form the lens. And since it's kind of an oddball shaped part anyways, I don't think it will hold exactly the way we need it to be unless I do that. So we're going to make this removable. Otherwise, if it was maybe something flat, we could just put 1 piece of this on the top, nail it in, call it a day. But I think we need to have it removable so that we can switch the 2 out. So that's what we're going to work on. And what we're kind of running into here is we've got 5.5 inches here, and if we just cut over 5.5 inches, we're going to fall right in the middle of this hole on the edge. I don't want to do that. So instead, we're going to determine how far in we need to come to get the 5.5 to land on a flat spot. So in order to do that, if we cut just a hair inside this first hole line here, then we'll end up just right inside this one, which is what the goal is. So we're going to measure over to here, whatever that dimension is. We're going to run it through our table saw to get us a straight edge up through here. And then once we get that, we can cut off our pieces for the top. I cut the pegboard with my table saw to use as the top of the vacuum box. After the pieces were cut, I marked and pre-drilled holes into the top supports of the box to avoid any splitting of the supports. So I'm using these truss screws, and the reason why is because they have a very good grip whenever you're going into wood. I wanted to use them here, that way it'd be easy to hold everything down. And again, the idea is I'm going to mount our mold to the top of each one of these panels. So I'll be flipping this off and screwing from the bottom of this up into the mold itself. And then we're going to use these same screws to grip into the bottom of that mold. So these I would recommend for pretty much anything, as far as if you wanted to get a really good bite into a piece of wood. They're really good. But anyhow, we're going to take this off, mount it to our molds, and then we're getting close on this. I centered the mold on the pegboard and drew an outline around the outside of the mold. I then removed the mold and drilled holes through the pegboard as needed if there weren't already holes in the locations that I needed. Once the holes were drilled, I flipped the pegboard over and marked the holes on the bottom of the molds. I then pre-drilled the molds to keep them from cracking with the screws. Alright, so we've got our molds attached to the pegboard. Now we are going to put these on top of the box, and then it's on to production. We're going to try to make a vacuum formed mold over top of these for our lenses. Another thing to take into consideration on the mold we made, so I created this mold with Tinkercad. And whenever I had it printed by the same gentleman that printed the masks for us. Whenever I made this, initially I had done it out of PLA because the mask is made out of PLA. And PLA, you can have skin contact with it, there's no issues there, and that's why we did that with the mask. However, this isn't. And the problem with PLA is that it can't take much heat. Well, since we're going to be pulling out a piece of plastic that's near its melting point and placing it directly on this, this needs to be able to withstand heat. So what I had him do was he printed this out of ABS plastic for me. And ABS is used for a lot of automotive parts that go on engines, different things, and it can handle a lot of high temperatures. So we did that to make sure that whenever we put that piece of plastic down over top of this, it doesn't melt or deform this. And that was critical in this. It's a note to take. If you're going to try to make a 3D printed mold, make sure you do it out of a plastic that can handle high heats. Whatever plastic you end up going with, just look into it first to make sure that it can handle whatever the temperature is of that plastic that you're going to pull out of the oven. Again, we used ABS and this worked out great, no issues. Another thing you'll note here is this looks real gray. That's because we wanted to sand this down and get as smooth of a product as we could. So as you can see here, and you can listen, this is because whenever the 3D printer prints, it prints in layers, so it's not perfectly smooth. It looks pretty good, but to the touch it's a little rough. And it was no different here. The model that I used for this actually is from Tinkercad, and unfortunately it's not really smooth. So having said that, I knew that I was going to have to sand this down as good as I could so that our mold would come out and be at least to the point where we can look out and see everything pretty good. And it is. It turned out really well. But now this, you can hear it. You don't hear how loud this is. You don't get any of those noises because we sanded this down. So there's a couple things to take into consideration. If you're going to have it 3D printed, have it printed out of a material that can handle high heat. And however you're wanting the finish to come out of your mold, you need to make sure that you prep this accordingly. If you want it to be smooth, sand it down. Otherwise, your mold's your plastic is gonna look just like whatever finish you have on the mold itself.